Please welcome to the stage, it's me, Axios host and editor, Niala Boodhoo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us in beautiful Long Beach this morning. Please take a seat if you haven't already. My name is Niala Boodhoo, and I'm an Axios host and editor, and I'm excited to kick off our great conversation this morning about decarbonization in Southern California. And thank you, all of you who came from different parts of SoCal, for coming in today. For those of you who are tuning in online, please be sure to use the hashtag Axios Events. And let's get started. I'd like to welcome our first guest, the Chief Sustainability Officer for LA County, Rita Kampalath. Hi, Rita. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get straight into it and just talk about decarbonization. And when we talk about the state's 2030 targets for that, what are your priorities for LA County when it comes to the current decarbonization policies that you all have been developing and implementing?
Yeah, we have a lot of priorities for sure. And we've kind of done the work of looking at our climate action plan and developing that for the county. So we kind of know what some of our largest sectors are in terms of contributions. So one of the things, for instance, that we're looking at is building decarbonization and starting to develop a policy around that.
So when you say building decarbonization, can you tell us a little bit more of what that looks like?
Yeah, for sure. So our building sector accounts for, I think, roughly a quarter, if not more, of the GHG greenhouse gas emissions in the region. And that's because of natural gas usage. It also very much depends on where electricity is sourced, because obviously we know that some of our electricity still is generated by fossil fuels. So what we're looking at is how do we move those buildings to lower their greenhouse gas emissions, whether that's through switching to electric appliances where possible, but it can also be energy efficiency, reducing overall energy use.
Right, and when we think about that, like I'm just even thinking about a building like this, and I always am surprised when I come to California, like how old it is, right? I'm from Florida, so this is why I always say this. But like when you think about adaptation, and that was what I wanted to ask you about, like when we're talking about climate resiliency, oftentimes we talk about mitigation versus adaptation. Can we just stick first with the building resiliency and adaptation, and when we're thinking particularly about older buildings, what that looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, there's still a lot of work that we can do with older buildings to increase energy efficiency. It gets a little bit boring maybe, but it can be things like replacing windows or better insulation, even just how a building is operated to make sure that we're really, minimizing the amount of energy that we're using when a building is not in use. It can be as simple as things like turning off the lights and like adjusting temperatures, and that can have a big impact. But then you get into larger, efforts like actually replacing appliances and moving from something that may be natural gas powered to something that's electric.
So what is the sort, as CSO for the county, when you're talking to buildings and tenants and corporations, what is your message about the incentive for this? Especially as I don't know how much of it is energy prices versus being good corporate citizens. Like, how are you messaging that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're still working on that, and I think the policy is complex, right? So it's not just going to be about like bringing down a hammer and telling people that they can no longer do X, Y, Z. They need to switch out all their appliances. It's really going to be a combination of, first of all, phasing things in with very large buildings, looking at other regulations that are coming down the pike and making sure that we're aligning them. So when people have to replace an appliance already, maybe they switch to electric at that time. It's also about offering incentives and things like that. And then again, as you mentioned, like when you were talking about energy efficiency retrofits, that is something that should result in cost savings as well.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about mitigation versus adaptation, what is the strategy for you all?
Yeah, well, so just definitions. Mitigation is really about reducing GHG emissions overall, right? So that's just how we kind of try to lessen the impacts of climate by just reducing what we're emitting. Adaptation is really about, understanding that there are going to be impacts. We're already seeing them around us, and how do we shift our behavior or other things in order to be able to kind of cope and better manage that.
And so one of the things I wanted to ask you about is LA County was just the largest recipient of EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Program A lot of that actually has to do with right here, the port and Long Beach. Can you tell us a little bit about that $500 million and what that specifically is going to be going into here?
Yeah, we were so thrilled to get that award. I think we've done a lot of work in this region to kind of prepare ourselves for kind of figuring out what we need to do, going out and talking to communities and leaders and kind of developing a strategy as a region. Through all of that work, goods movement has been identified as a really high priority for us to tackle, not only because, it is a large source of emissions, like the ports are the biggest port complex in the country. So, when we think about what's happening in the ports of LA and Long Beach, that really has like national impacts, right, in terms of the overall emissions. And so it's not only that, but it's also one of the largest sources of air quality issues for our communities. We have a lot of lower income communities that are around the ports and around our freight corridors, like the 710, that are really heavily impacted. In addition, that sector can be really hard to decarbonize, right? We're talking about big, heavy duty trucks. So that was why that was a really big priority when that money became available through the federal government, through the IRA, for us to really design a project around that. So things that it's going to address are, again, those chargers that are hard and expensive to put in place, those medium and heavy duty trucks. Also, education and workforce development to make sure that communities are able to tap into some of those transition and changes that we're trying to make.
When you go to education and workforce, can we stop with that for a minute here? First of all, just in terms of education and community messaging, oftentimes, particularly communities that have been the victims of all of this are the most skeptical of government programs. Like, what is your messaging to these communities about what LA County is trying to do in terms of air pollution?
Yeah, that really can be the case. I think that we're really trying to shift our approach over the past few years in terms of how we engage communities and making sure that things aren't so top down, but we're really engaging them in the process from the beginning. So that's time consuming, but it is really worthwhile in the long run to just have conversations with communities along the way and making sure that we're being transparent about what we're doing. I think we're lucky in LA that we have a very active advocacy base that kind of helps us connect and actually has deep connections with the community as well. And so we also try to engage them as partners in the work that we're doing.
When it comes to workforce development and we think about the green economy, what is the biggest challenge you see in terms of the workforce that we have, and if they have the skills needed to do all of the things that we've been talking about?
Yeah, we have a very diverse workforce and economy in LA, but there's a lot of work to do. So it is about training people for those industries of the future and things like EV chargers, and we're going to need people to install them, but also to be able to, do all that maintenance that we're hearing about with those chargers that go down, which is like software skills as well. So it's that, but it's also, again, making sure that we are plugging in communities that maybe haven't been part of those workforce and those industries historically, right? So it's not just making sure that the workforce is there, it's who has access to those jobs. Mm-hmm.
You're a chemical engineer by training yourself. How does that mindset translate to the work that you're doing now?
Oh gosh. Yeah, so I have very much an engineering background, and I think as I was getting into my career, again, a very technical side of things, I would always see how policy really influenced everything that we did. And I think at some point, I wanted to be more on the side of figuring out what we were doing and how we were doing versus just implementing policy. So I think, an engineering background is helpful because there are a lot of aspects of our job and our policy that are very technical, and we also work with a very diverse group of stakeholders through agencies, the folks that are operating or implementing projects, and it's nice to be able to talk to people and understand where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the Clean Power Alliance, which has been a partner for you all in renewables. Can you give us a sense of how that work, how much it matters in terms of the goals that we're talking about when it comes to decarbonization?
Yeah, so the Clean Power Alliance, for those who are not familiar with it, is a utility that was formed in the LA region. It is what's called a community choice aggregation entity. And so that's something that's allowable in California. Basically what they do is they're able to source power. Again, kind of the goal is really to move things towards more renewable energy. So our local entity is the Clean Power Alliance. They've been a huge partner in helping us reach our goals at the county for renewable energy. So, for instance, we were lucky enough that they offer, several tiers of green energy. In 2022, we were able to move all of our county facilities that are CPA customers to 100% renewable energy. And that is also now a default choice that is available to all the customers in the CPA territory, which I think there are like 35 jurisdictions that in like the LA Ventura region that are customers.
And when you think about the grid in particular, what can you give us sort of a sense of renewables, the role they're playing in the grid, and what you would like to see by 2030? Like, what is your goal?
Yeah, for sure. So, by 2030 and 2050, we are slowly trying to move to fully carbon neutral state. So we're
6 years from now.
I know. Yes. Well, we have midway goals in 2030, but again, like I was saying, the nice thing about a place like CPA, once we've kind of stated those goals as the county and big jurisdictions, people are moving to kind of meet those. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially in the grid. We understand that even with the demands that we currently have, our grid is not always up to the task. But again, I think the nice thing about having the state and local jurisdictions put forward those goals, it's giving us all something to work towards.
One thing I'm curious about is, we are here in Long Beach. We're talking about you talked about working regionally. How hard is that, do you feel like, from a county perspective, to engage with all of these perhaps different other municipalities on this?
Yeah, we have 88 cities in the county. Yeah, it is a challenge. It is something that I think is really necessary because, for those of us who didn't come from Long Beach today, you're probably just driving through a continuous stream of cities. So it's not like we have, undeveloped areas or suburbs around our cities. It's really like a big continuous urban region. So it is challenging, but it tends to be for us like kind of issue specific. So our cities are very diverse. They have very different interests. And what we found to work is kind of identifying topics that are of interest to cohorts of cities and bringing them together.
Rita, you all are revising your current strategy when it comes to all of this. I think it's interesting to think about, I think for so long we were just talking about having strategies in place. Yeah. Now we're talking about revising them. What is, to your mind, the most important things and how you're adapting policies now to what the strategic needs are for the county? Yeah,
so you're talking about our county plan. That's our sustainability plan, which really presents our big overall vision for what sustainability is in the county. And it's kind of hard for me to believe, but it has been 5 years since we first released that plan. Personally, I'm really focused on implementation and moving forward. We've got a lot of things that are in the works in those past 5 years, like the decarbonization policy. We just put out a draft community forest management plan. So there's a lot of work that's been done to that was kind of launched out of that plan. So when we think about the revision, a lot of my vision for it is not about, planning for the sake of planning or just putting out some nice splashy document, but it's really about being targeted in how we look at it. So, we'll do things like take out actions that we've accomplished, see where things may have changed, our thinking has changed, see where we can kind of push our goals farther and be a little bit more ambitious as well.
You've talked a lot about the things that happen in LA, how much of national significance they have. I'm thinking about conversations that we are going to be having at Axios House next week in New York for Climate Week. In particular, I'm going to be talking to the White House National Climate Advisor, Ali Zaidi. What would you say to him, to the Biden administration, about what LA County needs as we think about these conversations that are going to be happening next week around not just domestic but international climate policy?
Wow, yeah, I would say a couple of things. First of all, we talked about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. Again, I can't tell you how exciting it was to see a source of funding.
From the IRA.
From the IRA. Significant source of funding that could be used to implement some of these big ambitious goals that we've been putting into place because, as you mentioned, we have a lot of big plans and big goals. A lot of it now is like, how do we actually do them with the resources? So one thing I would say is, thank you. Hopefully that is a program that can continue and we can build on. I would also say, people sometimes look at LA and see us having resources. We're a big city. We've got a lot of great things going for us. And so sometimes I think there's an attitude of like, LA doesn't need help. Like we can kind of do things ourselves. We're moving things ourselves. But I would also say like, look to us as like a model and a partner to like be really ambitious and to meet some of the goals that we want to, and hopefully be like a beacon and a model for the rest of the world, because I think we have a lot going for us. Again, we have the plans, we have the leadership. If we have the resources and the support to make them happen, I think we're ready to do that.
Well, fortunately, we are out of time, but thank you. That was a really good place to end. Rita Kampalath, LA County Chief Sustainability Officer. Thank you, Rita.